Sean, it has been a while. We're here on a Saturday morning. I'm going to start dating these things. The reason I'm going to start dating them is I'm working to hold myself accountable to recording and getting content out quickly. So we're here on Saturday, August 17th, and this episode should go out here in the next, let's say, 2 weeks or so. How have you been doing?
I've been doing great, man. It's about 9 months in since jumping off into starting my own business full time. And man, I was so excited and gung ho, and we've got a great team. And then I quickly realized that it doesn't matter how great we are at the thing we do. If we don't know how to get our brand out there and sell, I don't know why I use air quotes, but if we don't learn those things, we can't impact the people that we really want to. So it has been a very steep learning curve, and I love every second of it.
What's something that surprised you? Just give first like initial surprise that you thought, hey, this is going to either be easy or this is going to go quick, but it didn't, or this went a lot quicker than I expected. What surprised you?
Yeah, the biggest surprise that I will say is I have spent years pouring in and helping and supporting and building others up, friends that have their businesses and on and on and on, and people that have worked for me in the past. And now that I'm going out on my own, and we have a very small team right now, but I thought, okay, all these people that I've been supporting all these years, they're going to support me. And from a numbers perspective, I'll say maybe 30% were hoorah, go chase your dream, do your thing. And then it's like, oh no, I'm not going to spend money with you. I'm not going to support you. I'll cheer for you, but I'm not going to, support you in that way. And so probably 1% of my network are actually doing business, seeking us out. And that was just jarring. Whenever you live a life of supporting and building others up, and then whenever you go out on your own, you quickly realize, oh, I see what's happening here. And look, this is the way of the world. People are focused on themselves and how they can make their own life better. And so while it was, I'll say, heartbreaking and challenging at first, then I just leaned into, well, it is what it is. I have to show them the value that we can bring. We have to show them how we can make their lives better. So it leans into marketing and branding and selling and showcasing what you can do and how you can make their lives better. It was a gut-wrenching moment, but then I recognized, well, there's nothing I can do about it. This is what I signed up for. I wanted to grow, and now I'm growing.
So what did you think was going to happen? Do you think you were just going to hang the shingle up and then everybody was going to be like, oh, Sean, this is awesome. How can I work with you?
Yes. Not everybody, but I think, as I look back in my career, and to be fair, it's only been the past probably 8 or 9 years that I've been hyper focused on supporting others and building others up. And I have friends that have been entrepreneurs. I have friends that I spend literally thousands of dollars a year at their business supporting them. And whenever I say, hey, can you come to this $500 course? And so while gut wrenching at the same time, it's like, you know what? They're on their journey. I'm on my journey. And, they always talk about how as you're leveling up, the people in your life are going to change. And letting go is very painful. I don't want to say, oh, well, you're not doing business with me, I'm going to disown you. No. And I still support them. I still buy from them. But I also made a mental note, check, got it. Okay, I'm moving forward. And then the people that do want to work with us and do business with us, Mike, man, it's just like, I give them everything, because when you are starting out and somebody trusts you enough to hand over their dollars, that's powerful. That means a lot. And so we want to do everything we can to ensure that we're delivering a product and service that is going to change their life.
I think there's a challenge that exists out there, at least that I've seen in a couple of different places. And some people will talk about in the context of like founder-led sales in technology companies, and making the transition from founder-led sales to what I would call founder amplified, then founder augmented, and just start to layer in some specialization there. The On the technical side, the founder can go out there and sell into a network, and they're delivering a product or a service into a network. That product or service might be driven by a demand that they saw inside a company. So as a COO, you realize, hey, we spend a lot of time on all of these other resources. I'm going to build some technology that solves for the top three challenges that I run into, as an example, right? And then you're engaged with your COO friends, and those people want to buy. Because they understand they understand that you get the challenge and that you've got this technology that's going to help them solve, and they want to back you and they want to support you. And then there's this shift where people have to start selling into other organizations. Well, on the service side, it's a different version of that same challenge, and because on the service side, it shifts from, hey, wait a second, you used to just kind of hang out with me and talk about this stuff, and now you want me to pay you to come and do this? Why? And the reason why is because I have to provide, I still have to cover, put a roof over the house, and I've got to pay for kids, and I've got to, and if I'm going to do this and can do it as a professional in this area, it requires a source of income. And let's just be direct with each other. If you don't think it's valuable, then let's stop having the conversations around those things. If you do think it's valuable, because this happens, right? I mean, like we laugh about it, and there are going to be people listening to it who are like, well, hold on, that's just kind of being a jerk. And we both benefit from the coaching conversations. We both benefit from these things. We do. But one of us is in business doing this. So
yeah,
I've seen it both on the technology side and on the product and the service side. And I think the product side, it feels more, you see and hear it, and it feels more natural. On the service side, it feels really uncomfortable because people are wondering, hey, I used to be able to just jump on a call with you and you'd whiteboard some stuff up and it didn't cost me anything. And now you're telling me that you do whiteboard as a service, it's going to cost money.
Yes. I mean, but to your point, right? This is kind of something like, somewhat analogous to setting boundaries, right? If we've got friends that are taking advantage of the situation, and then all of a sudden you say, you know what, I got to set this boundary. Like, whoa, why you got to be an ass? Hold on a second. I was getting a lot out of this. It's like, yeah, I get it. But, and you have to balance this as an entrepreneur who is just starting out. I do believe you have to give, and then you get to a point where you can start to monetize. And once you get to a point where you can start to monetize, you prioritize the people that you are working with. If they are paying you, you've got to lean in and support them. And you can start tapering off on the freebies, which might not make for the most comfortable conversations. However, you can make the conversation easier. Well, I've got somebody who's paying me to do this, and I have to pay my mortgage, and more than happy to get some time on my calendar, but I can't bump off people that are actually paying me off of my calendar to give you freebie. And usually just having that candid conversation, they might not like it, but they'll kind of get it. Like, well, okay, I guess he's got a point there. And so they might be a little salty and then eventually come around, and some may end up paying you, or some might just watch your content for free, which that's why you put it out there.
That's it. That's why you put it out there, and you make it available. And the thing I like to ask is, I like people to say, I like to start with, what questions you have for me? Because if you can give me a question, I can point you to content that I've recorded on this thing. And then we can go into the next question. So let's talk about the boundaries piece, because that's one of those things I struggle with. And the reason I struggle with it is I like to give. And I'm a giver of time and energy. I don't like to see people struggle. If I can help them, I want to help them, and I do help them. So I will give, and I make myself available. And I make myself available either by sharing my Calendly link with folks, or answering the questions like we said about, hey, here's a podcast episode that you can listen to. The podcast episode to listen to is a little bit different because it didn't helps me see them actually demonstrate some work. But as a person who likes to give, who operates as a leader and looks at leadership as an act of service, how would you guide me on creating some of those boundaries?
So this is something that admittedly I have struggled with as well. Our team right now, there's 4 of us. We have myself and 3 W-2 employees. Then we have a couple of contractors on the team. So my number 2 in the business, her name is Crystal. She is phenomenal. She is our operator and I'm the visionary, which is also interesting because I, for the longest time, was the operator. But her and I complement each other very well. And I, like you, like to give and provide value and just support and help people because I didn't have a lot of that growing up and I didn't have a lot of that early in my career. So I want to be able to share the lessons that I've learned. Now, I had this grand idea to write a book and create course content where each chapter aligned with video and audio. And so you could get the book, you can consume it in written word if that's what you wanted. You could watch video or you could listen to the audio. I was going to write this book, going to spend a year doing all of this stuff, creating all the content, and then give it away. And Crystal's like, I'm sorry, what? I like to lean into building and supporting people. And yes, that is a monumental amount of work to put into a project or initiative and then just give it away. But I'm doing it to put goodwill out there. Gary V, Alex Hormozy, they're always talking about give, 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 give. But you have to balance that with your ability to actually pay the bills, which means you have to be an absolute workhorse to give, give, give. And I encourage people, start as young as possible, build as many skills as possible so that you can give while you've got the energy, and then build that brand and reputation for providing value first. And then people will have a mindset of, my God, if this is free, what do I get if I pay? And then that kind of feeds into the offers conversation is what is your actual offer, making sure that everybody understands that. It's a very long-winded way of kind of giving back or getting back to your question of how do I coach you? I think that it really comes down to creating that balance and understanding that providing value for free does provide value, but you have bills to pay. We have salaries to pay. We have healthcare and benefits for our employees that we have to pay. And so you have to be able to quickly assess how much time and energy you have from a capacity perspective and invest that time and energy over here where you can monetize, and then what's left over, lean into the giving side of things.
What's when you talk about like this, the giving mentality, right? So, Gary V, what's his jab, right hook or something like
right
that.
Hook,
right?
yeah.
Right? And then, everybody will talk about just giving. How do you think about where the paywall happens in that give piece? Like, is it give, like, how do you think about that?
Well, I think that there's a few ways to give. Okay. One, you can have one-on-one coaching sessions or, hey, book some time on my Calendly for half an hour. I used to give people like, hey, if you want an hour, let's do it. And I was like, okay, no, that's a bit much, because then by the end of it, they're like, oh, this is so helpful. Can we do it again? Yeah, for sure. Here's my rate. Oh no. And I wouldn't hear from him again. And so now I was like, all right, well, lesson learned. You get half an hour. Well, we'll talk through some things and then we'll talk about, hey, here's the offer. And usually people will still run off and, not talk to me for a little while, but there are a few that are like, absolutely. Where do I sign up? Bill me, invoice me. And those are the people that you want to invest in. So you have that, we'll say, medium when it comes to giving. You and I have a podcast and YouTube. That is another incredible medium to deliver value at scale. And you said something a moment ago that I love, and I do as well. Whenever people reach out to me, I'll ask them, hey, what are you struggling with? Hey, here's a link to this episode. Go check it out. Let me know your thoughts. And if I never hear from them again, cool, I just saved some time. But if I do hear from them, then it's almost like a filtering. What did you get out of the episode? Did you really listen to it, or did you just go click on it, thumbs up, and move on just to get in my calendar? And so it's a way to filter people out, because I want to get into the conversation of the right customers versus the wrong customers, which we'll get into. But the right customers are going to do the work. And I would much rather invest our time and energy into a customer that is willing to do the work as opposed to somebody that's just going to phone it in and blame everybody else for all of their problems, because there's far too much risk to our brand to get engaged with a customer that's going to bash us. They're not going to do their part, and then they're going to bash us and say, well, this project didn't get done because of WSS solutions. No, it didn't get done because you didn't do the work. So we're very picky about our customers. Since we are in startup phase, we are less picky than we will be in the future, but we have a very specific vision and target customer avatar that we want to get into. Right now, it's, hey, do you have a credit card and a Pulse? Cool. I only need one of those. Let's go. So but that's how you have to start off, right? Because you got to get the reps in and you got to get flow through the system. And so right now, or in the early stages, you can't always be picky. But as you start getting more and more customers, it's important to be aware of which customers do you enjoy working with? Which customers do you make the most money with? Let's lean into those and then start tapering off the customers that suck.
Yeah, and there's a lot in what Sean shared there. There's a lot of opportunity for trading, for value exchange that happens, and there are certain customers who are happy to go in and do the work. Some of them because they've struggled with this stuff in the past and they know the cost of not being able to solve for X, Y, or Z. They've made that bad hire. They've gone down the wrong path. They've done whatever it is that you can help them with, right? So there are some customers who have a level of experience where they understand the value. They have a solid perception of value associated with the service that you provide. There's other folks that you're going out there and you're trying to convey value to them. And I would warn you on that, because value is in the eye of the beholder. I can't dictate what somebody else is going to value. What I can do is start to see what signals are out there that start to indicate a perception of value and a willingness to commit and to invest. There are some customers that you'll work with who will look to try to negotiate whatever it is that they want to negotiate. They just look at the number and in those instances, they might say things like, well, you get our logo and it's good exposure, or we've got more projects that are down the road, or whatever. Be careful about that trap, because as Sean said, early days when you need to bring cash in, and heck, even later days, you still need to bring cash in. you have something that you've got to cover. You may find yourself in a situation where you chase money that sounded good on the front end, but ultimately cost you a lot of time, energy, and effort on the other end. Sean, let's talk about that ICP discussion. Like, what's your ideal customer profile? So how are you kind of sorting and filtering customers today versus 9 months ago? What's changed in that 9-month period?
Yeah, I wish I could say that we've nailed down an ideal process for identifying and working with our ICPs. But right now, we're still figuring that piece out. We know the types of customers that we want to work with, those that appreciate us and value us. As an example, we have one customer that all they do is complain about their monthly invoices month after month after month after month. And they try to push us out, but then all of a sudden their business falls apart. And so they pull us back in. And so there's this tug of war that's just constantly going on. And they're always hammering us for pricing. On the flip side, we have a relatively new customer that we bid a project, and the executive that we were working with were like, oh my God. And I was like, oh, did we miss the mark? Because our pricing is pretty fair at this point in time as a startup. They're like, actually, yeah, I'm going to pay you this, which was double what I bid. And I was like, okay, yeah, we will make that work, right? So to be clear, very few customers are actually going to pay you more than you ask. But when you identify those customers that truly understand and comprehend the value that you bring to their business, they're not going to bat an eye at it. They are going to pay you what you're worth gladly because you are making their lives easier. So that example, very stark contrast of two different types of customers, since we are so early on in this stage of our business, we don't have enough volume or quantity of customers to develop a process around how do we nail this down, identify it, target them, work with them, and go type of a thing. These are the types of processes that are just going to take us a little bit of time to figure things out. Like I said, we're less than a year in at this point in time. Once we get a larger quantity of customers, it makes it easier for us to really put processes around it. And as a former process guy, and with my number two being a process person, and coming from a very large publicly traded corporation, we have this mindset of process. Well, that won't scale. Let's not do that. Well, we can't do that because it's too fragile. And we ran into that very early on in starting this thing. And then we quickly realized, okay, like we're looking at full-blown implementations of CRMs, and there's two of us right now. Technically, we could do this off of a spreadsheet until we get more than 15 customers on our customer list, right? It's important to keep those things in mind, but if you come from scale into a startup, it's easy to fall into the trap of over processing or over complicating things via process, and you're just bogging yourself down when you really just need to get flow through the system.
So how many steps does a process need?
Oh God, as few as possible.
Right.
I mean, I know you're a big process mapping guy. We do too. I mean, we're big into Six Sigma and process mapping and things like that. But this is going to be highly dependent on the size of an organization. A small business with 2 to 5 people, their processes are going to have much fewer steps in it. A large publicly traded organization with 3,000 employees, you start looking at their process maps in the swim lanes, it gets very convoluted, complicated very quickly. So learning how to develop skills around mapping processes is important. But I like to think just as few steps in the process as possible is what you need to do. And so whenever we walk into a customer and do process mapping, we put everything up on a whiteboard. I love whiteboarding. I know you do as well. And when you just walk into a boardroom and start mapping the stuff out for your customer, they're telling you what the process is, because as a consulting firm, we don't know the process. All you're doing is drawing it on the board, and they're like, okay, wow, we need to make some adjustments here. And very quickly, like, well, we don't need that. We can reroute this. We can do this. And all you've done is drawn it on a board for them. Right. That's a very long-winded way of saying as short as possible.
Short as possible. So, and how many customers do you have right now? Or how many customers total have you had over the 9-month period?
Probably 14, 15, something like that.
So I'm going to call bullshit. You have enough customers that you've worked with to refine an ICP and build out a process that is repeatable. It doesn't need to be complex. So when you take a lot of the stuff that you're already doing with organizations and shift that perspective and shine the light back on your business, you'll start to see some things that repeat across. And if you said less than 10, then I would say, okay, you don't have enough, you don't have enough data points coming in. But in that, once you're past that 10, you've got enough information, and you can be able to go through and say, okay, here's some questions. Questions might be, of these deals, which one would the customer articulate a significantly higher exchange of value than we would apply to the level of effort that it put in there? Because you can put something that feels very low effort into something, but can have significant value perception on the client side because you've opened their eyes to certain things. And those are ones where you're like, you know what? That's a high impact thing that I can do inside an organization that doesn't require a lot of effort. and I can do it over and over and over again. Then I can also look at it and say, hey, what are some of the things where we just get stuck? Who are some of the people that we're working with where we just get stuck? How long have they been in that role? What's their background? Why did they bring us in? How do we avoid those people like the plague? Because they're just not ready for us right now. And no matter what we do, there's always going to be something more that they're looking for in that area. But they're going to try to do it in the scope of the current agreement. So now scope creep becomes a killer of the business. So I think you've got enough data after 10 where you can go back through and say, you know what, I don't want to touch that with somebody else's 10-foot pole. And what becomes really cool is then you start to sort and filter your you start to sort and filter customers, and you think about other providers that are out there where you can connect them with that provider. And you might even get a referral for connecting them with that provider because they're a better fit for that organization. So I think you might need a little bit of your own medicine on shrinking up some of the process stuff.
That's fair. One thing that you touched on there that's also highly relevant and applicable is some of the most challenging customers are undeveloped leaders that are in executive level roles. They are extremely difficult to work with, quite frankly, because on one hand, they can kind of see the value, and we have some that they understand the value and want us to do a lot of work, but also view us as a threat. Not in the way that you might think, though. View us as a threat in not that we're going to take their job, but that we are going to highlight their mass level of incompetence. That's a real challenge, right? And so it puts us and them in a precarious and challenging situation, not an ideal ICP, and trying to stay away from those customers. Now, this one particular customer, like, we don't hardly do anything at all with them anymore, but at one time we did, and we're like, oh, we got to figure out how to kind of pull back and create a little bit of distance there, which is also not always an easy thing. When you're a business owner and you need revenue, it's challenging to turn away revenue because the customer isn't the right fit.
Super hard, especially when you've got to cover expenses. As Sean said, a couple W-2 employees, moving a W-2 employee inside our organization as well. You pay for benefits, we get taxes, insurance, like all of this stuff that you've got out there, which increases the nut that you've got to cover inside your business. So you've got to be deliberate about how you make decisions, have some decision-making criteria around who do you bring on, who don't you bring on. And in that instance, like you mentioned, where you've got somebody who's early career leader and maybe didn't get a lot of leadership coaching or training or opportunity or reps to improve as a leader, one of the things that I would wonder, or that I think would be interesting in that kind of conversation is, why did the company invest in you guys to come in? And what's the person's perception of why they invested in you? And because I've been brought in a couple of times to evaluate leaders inside a business, to create a package to help them get fired. Like, it's basically, hey, I want you to go in and assess my VP of sales or this team and determine if we've got the right people. And if we don't, how do we get them out? And typically, more often than not, the problem is not that person or that team. It's actually the leadership inside the organization and their perception of the people in those teams and some of the obstacles that they're creating in their business. So it's kind of funny how people look at this stuff. It's like, hey, I want you to come in and fix this thing because I'm certain that's what my problem is. And the reality is their problem is a little bit different than what they think it is. And sometimes they're actually the problem.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very real thing. And it becomes increasingly difficult to navigate that, because if you go in and start working with a customer and you have one point of contact, you're only getting their perspective. You're viewing the problem through the lens of one individual. An interesting thing starts to occur when you get exposure to more and more people within the organization, because then you get to hear the second side, the third side, the fourth side to these different stories. So, as an outsider coming in, it is an incredible opportunity to piece together a more holistic understanding of what's actually going on. And the more data points you get, the higher the resolution you have in terms of understanding what the actual problem is. And it makes it easier to solve that specific problem for them. Easier. It doesn't make it easy because you still have feelings and emotions and egos to navigate, but it does make it easier with having more information.
And I do want to get into the ego piece a bit. Here, this is foreshadowing. We'll get into ego in a little bit. Sean had a pretty good article out there around ego and impact and leadership. Let's talk first, though, about some of the things you're seeing where there are executives out there who see all of the opportunity that's out there. They might see all of the postings about how you could be the next best fractional leader in whatever. You're going to be a fractional COO or a fractional CMO or a fractional CRO or a fractional whatever. There are a lot of fractionals that are out there. There are a lot of people who are running their own solo businesses, consulting practices, advising practices, call them whatever you want. It's this whole idea of, hey, you know what? I've been stuck in this corporate grind for a number of years, and I think I want to make a move. What happens next?
Fun fact, we do fractional C-level HR and IT work. A little plug. That's the extent of my plugs. But yes, so this is a very real thing. I've had a lot of conversations with a number of VPs, not so many C-level, but a lot of directors and VPs that want to go start doing fractional work. And having an understanding of what it looks like to build a pipeline is crucial. Having a strong brand for yourself and a presence online. And I like to think of this, and we have two separate worlds. We have the physical world and we have the virtual world. And it is important that you network with people at networking events like BNI and NIA and Evanta and all these different communities in person. But you also have to have an online presence and persona. And you have to spend years curating and building that brand so that people know who you are and what you're about. Because if you're a VP of IT and you've got 230 followers on LinkedIn, you don't have a banner image and you don't have any information, and you go in and say, well, I'm the best CIO you could possibly have. LinkedIn is going to be the first place you're going to go. And if you haven't posted anything in 8 months and your profile looks like a high school kid threw it together, which isn't really fair because they'd probably look better than that. But if you don't have a strong personal brand, immediately they're going to discredit you. It is important, if you want to go out and start filling these fractional roles, that you have a strong personal brand and presence with proof of all of the results and impact that you have had over the years. That helps from a confidence perspective, because really confidence comes from just a stack of undeniable results that you are who you say you are. But if that information isn't publicly available, then it's just you trying to sell yourself to these potential customers.
So they go in, they're like, hey, I see a bunch of other people doing it. It's time for me to get out of the rat race. I want to go do something a little bit different. Heck, maybe I'm not ready to go out completely on my own. Maybe I want to go play startup for a little bit. I'm smiling for anybody who's not watching on the video. There are a lot of people who want to play startup, and before you go play startup, realize you're impacting people's lives. So that they aren't playing on that side. But let's say they want to go in and maybe it's like, I'm not really ready to go build out my own thing. I want to go do it in a smaller environment. What have you seen happen there?
Well, I think it's important that, one, it's not a knee-jerk reaction. You don't go do this because you don't like your boss. You don't go do this because your company culture is toxic. Yes, you might start off with that as your reasoning, but you don't get fired and then go start your own thing. Or you don't just get pissed off one day and start your own thing. You need to be very intentional about spending time, months, and more likely years creating this online persona of just providing value. And I'm going to go ahead and dive into my story. It was probably before I left corporate America, it was probably about 2 years before I finally departed that I knew, you know what, I'm going to start doing my own thing. Now, for obvious reasons, I didn't go broadcast that and tell it, but I became very active online, creating content, sharing the lessons that I learned, leaning into the podcast and the YouTube channel, provide value, provide value, provide value, getting out there, building as many relationships as possible. And this feeds into the conversation of networking as a W-2 versus the 1099. Networking as a W-2, there's zero pressure. You go to a conference, hey, I'm over at Gladiator, I'm their VP of IT, let's share some ideas, right? If you go to the same conference, but you are a service provider, all of a sudden people's walls are up like, oh God, this guy's just trying to sell me something. Spend as much time as possible networking and building relationships and learning and growing, and understand that those relationships, you're not going to be able to harvest those seeds for years in the future. But I think it is extremely important to spend a lot of time building your network, curating your brand, and having this philosophy and mindset of give, 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 give. But also, let's go back to the first of the episode, understand all these people across all these years, like 1% actually want to do business with us. And that's okay. That's okay. But you have to go into it with this mindset of understanding there is a tremendous amount of giving that has to occur before you can reap any sort of harvest from it.
Yeah. One of the things that Sean hit on, and it's a challenge that exists out there, is more and more people get bought into this idea of fractional, or going into smaller organizations, or doing whatever the thing, figuring out what's next, which is a really good thing to do. You can't reflect on what you're going to do. You can only reflect on what you do. So you get out there and you do work, and then you reflect on it and say, hey, did this work or did it not work? So there's some testing that will happen. There's testing that can happen in the background, like Sean had said, a couple of years, start to build a network and build some things. The other thing that I think is interesting in the whole discussion around networking in a W-2 environment versus a 1099 environment. And some of this stuff changed significantly during COVID. But there's when I'm networking, I'm out there really trying to figure out, where do I put this baseball card of a person, which sounds weird and strange, but it's what it is. Yeah, I've got this baseball card, and I know where Sean fits in my baseball card collection. I know how I can sort and filter and organize, and I know who I want to connect him to. So you collect and you connect these cards in that environment. That works both in a W-2 and a 1099 environment. What's interesting about the 1099 environment, where things start to shift, is many of those collectibles, those things you brought together, know so many more people than you know. They have a network. So it's not as much about me looking at, hey, is there an opportunity to sell something to them or provide a service directly to them? It's more of a, hey, do you know anybody who is struggling with this? And you ask those questions. And before you know it, you ask enough of those questions, people will say, it's funny, I just had a conversation with Susie over here, and she was saying that she had a friend who's looking for something around this area, and I think you might be able to help. And that is where that network can really create so many other connections that go above and beyond the belief of, hey, it's the person that's in my network who might buy something from me. It's actually the person in my network who is another endpoint that collects signal and can hear and see challenges that are in the market. And then they can actually help somebody on their end. They can say, hey, you know what? I got a guy who can do this thing. So network with intention, curate your network, And the thing that I've missed on a number of times, especially when I get really busy, is cultivating that network, like getting back into the
Hmm.
network and reminding them, hey, you know what, I'm thinking of you, or I saw this and you did this. That cultivation. So there's a curation component and there's a cultivation component. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And this is something that I figured out over the last, we'll say, year. Well, probably the first 3 months or so of doing this full time. I came to this realization of kind of bucketizing these baseball cards. We would have whenever I would meet with somebody, this person could fall into the potential customer bucket. And then this person falls into the potential employee bucket. This person falls into the potential referral partner bucket. So I've got three buckets that I think about. And one thing that I don't, I can't pinpoint the why. I could probably deduce why, but my bucket of potential employees is overflowing. I have so many great, incredible people that are like, hey, I want to come work with you and your team. You've got a great team. Cool. Can you get us some business? Because that's what we need right now. And so, as a business owner, you think about this in two primary pipelines: customer pipeline, employee pipeline. And as the customer pipeline fills, you got to have employees to service the work, not just service the work, but services at the standard that you hold for your organization. So all of these things have kind of started to become increasingly evident to me over the past year of I've got my baseball card collection of potential customer, potential employee, potential referral partner. But as you think pipelines, these two pipelines of employees and customers, those are extremely important to manage and at least be aware of.
Yeah, and if you look at them, I like to think of them as both as internal and external customers. So they're all customers. They just might be internal customers or external customers. And if you start to shift that perspective, you start to see, okay, hey, who are some of them who might even be external customers that might be internal customers at some point in the future? And all of this stuff kind of comes together because everything, at least for as long as I've been on this planet, everything continues to change. Yeah, there are different. There's a different operating environment that we get to operate in. There's a lot of noise in different places. There are things that people are struggling with. There are things that people can help with. But the cool part about operating with human beings is human beings have problems. And many times those human beings that have problems are the problem persists either because they don't know how to solve it. They're not aware of the information. They don't have it. They don't have the capability to solve it. It's like they don't have the skill set to be able to do it. So knowledge or skill set. Or they may not even know that there's a solution that exists out there. And that's where we as service providers really can help those folks who have problems. You don't create the problem. You don't go in there and start banging people over the head and say, "Hey, now you've got a headache. Let me give you an aspirin." That's not good behavior. There's enough problems out there, and we need more people out there actually helping to solve the problems, not creating the problems. So let's talk about one of the problems that exists in leadership inside organizations, which is ego. What do you? What are your thoughts on ego?
Man, ego is it is a an interesting topic to discuss and think about and navigate. Because the challenge is the larger someone's ego is, it's like a very large target. So the larger their ego gets, it's more and more of a target. Interestingly enough, the larger their ego is, the less aware of their ego they usually end up being, which makes for some very interesting conversations. I had an episode that I released last year on this specific topic, but whenever it comes down to ego, it can be an absolute destructive force in an organization and in life in general, friends, family. I mean, it can be a destructive force. And I think we have a responsibility to be able to break that down, or at least help people break that ego down so that they can be better. That process is not easy because anytime you shatter or break someone's ego, there are a lot of emotions that are involved. And I think that one of the things that I've found to be helpful in terms of breaking egos is being able to help them understand that this reality that they have crafted for themselves is not entirely real. And if you can bring facts and data and feedback from multiple people to the conversation and lean into the conversation with kindness and candor, hey, Mike, look, this has become kind of an issue here. And Mike's immediate response, maybe not you, this is another Mike that I'm talking
No,
about.
it's
Mike's
me.
immediate response.
Look, so my two biggest character flaws, or the things that have gotten me in the most trouble when it comes to making decisions, have been ego and loyalty. Those are the two.
Ego. But here's the other side of this. Ego can be a powerful force, a powerful driving force for us. But it's a double-edged sword in that regard because it can be a powerful driving force. It can also be an absolute destructive force. And so it's important to surround ourselves with people that we trust and respect and are comfortable saying, hey, you're not heading in the right direction here, Mike. I think your ego might be clouding your judgment, which is going to make for a very uncomfortable conversation, which is why it's crucial that you have trust. And look, some people with a massive ego, quite frankly, don't want to hear it. I've come across leaders in the past that bring my best side to the table. Here's the data, here's the facts, here's the numbers, here's the information, here's feedback from 30 different people saying this thing. I don't care. They don't understand because this. Well, some people are just going to have to, they're going to have to hit the wall at some point in time. And it's unfortunate when that occurs, but I think we have a responsibility to try our best to help prevent that from happening. And look, there's some people that you just can't save. You can't save all the puppies in the pound. You can't save all the people that just don't want to be saved. And their ego is just far too massive. And as I'm saying this, I have no doubt you and I have no doubt all of the listeners and viewers are thinking, yep, that's Jason, that asshole. Like, I don't want to deal with him, right? We all know who these people are in our life. I'm willing to bet the vast majority of us just go on about our lives and just let it run unchecked. Because in the grand scheme of things, if it doesn't affect me, if it doesn't affect you, it's just kind of a destructive force in their life. All right, fine. However, if their massive ego becomes a destructive force in my life, then I definitely have a responsibility to figure out how to navigate through that. And that means having crucial conversations that are very uncomfortable and developing skills around breaking an ego. And it can't just be, let's break this ego and done. You have to break the ego, and then you have to help them put all of the pieces back together. What is that Japanese pottery art, kunsigi or something? I don't know what it is.
About. It's basically what Kylo Ren did to his helmet when he had to put his helmet back together, or what they did with his anyway. So same kind of thing. I mean, there's a Star Wars nerd, I guess. What are some questions that you can ask that help people be more either self-aware or reflect, or create a space for self-reflection when it comes to thinking about the impact of ego on either their decision-making process, their approach with people, what have you, how ego is impacting the work that they do? What are some questions that folks can be asking them, should be asking themselves, or could be asking themselves?
This requires a significant amount of self-reflection and a willingness to be vulnerable and walk into a situation where you might be wrong. And I'm going to put myself, because there have been times in my career where I had a massive ego, because it's not just a switch like, oh, Sean has an ego. Oh, no, he doesn't have an ego. It's a spectrum. Like, how much ego does Sean have at this season of his life? And so it's important for us to pay attention to the people around us. Develop skills around reading the body language of others around us. And if we find ourselves in a situation where we're sitting in a boardroom having conversations and just telling it like it is in our mind, but we look around the room and everybody's kind of fidgeting and kind of getting squirmy or looking their head down and things like that, that needs to be a trigger for you. You need to feel comfortable having another conversation after the fact. Hey, Jason, like, I noticed you got a little fidgety whenever we were talking through that. What's going on? And if Jason says, "Oh, no, I'm good. Whatever, it's fine. Whatever you want to do, that's fine." That is another trigger for you to lean into that. Well, hold on a second. That something about your response tells me that it wasn't entirely fine. Now, if Jason and I have a tremendous amount of trust and he says, "Dude, what are you thinking, man? This is ridiculous." I have to be willing to listen to Jason and the feedback that he provides. Now, this is also another, we'll say, inflection point where things can get a little bit tricky, because Jason very well might not know information that I have. At that point, I owe it to Jason to explain, okay, well, this is actually the driving force here. Jason might say, "Oh, okay, well, I didn't really recognize that. That makes sense." But it's easy for us to get wrapped up in the busyness of our world and our life and just go on about our day and ignore those signs, those major red flags where people around us get uncomfortable and we just move on through, like just blasting away and ignoring them. Self-awareness, understanding how to read the behaviors of the people around us, and a willingness to lean into that with curiosity and acknowledge we might not know everything.
Shocking. Imagine that. We don't know everything. So ego, I mentioned ego and loyalty. Loyalty to others, loyalty to a decision that I've made. Ego, a view that I am the best at what I do, and if there was a better way to do things, I would already be doing it. Those are two things that have negatively impacted decisions, or I believe that I should be someplace different than I am. So a control that I've put in place a couple of years ago, going back now, probably 7, 8 years ago, maybe, yeah, let's say between 6 and 8 years ago, is I know now that whenever ego or loyalty are playing a role in a decision that I need to make, I get others involved because my blind spots are too big in those areas. And I tend to be a bit robotic. I'm pretty logical. I do not have pointy ears like Spock, but there's sometimes I struggle with the emotional side of things. I can just cut stuff off. And that is, so knowing that historically when I've made poor decisions, ego or loyalty have played a role in those things, I'm then able to put some controls in place to help me avoid some of those challenges. Will I make mistakes? Absolutely. And we'll continue to make mistakes as we go through this. But knowing it creates a space where there's an opportunity to help avoid some of the risk associated with those decisions, especially if you're talking about decisions that are not reversible.
One thing that I'd like to add onto that is as people ascend into an organization, there are times when they will unintentionally firewall themselves off from the majority of the organization. And think CEO that has 4 or 5 direct reports. They only have conversations with those 4 or 5 people. They will not let anybody else walk into their door. What that means is they are only getting feedback from these 4 or 5 people. I'm just going to say 4, just round number sake. So you got 4 people. You're only getting feedback from 4 people in the organization. That usually comes with a sense of trust. I've worked with these 4 people for a really long time. They've delivered for me in the past. People change. People will slip. Some people will get better. Some people will slip. When you firewall yourself off from the broader organization, whether it's ego or whatever the reason is, I don't have time to talk to people. What if 2 or 3 of those 4 start slipping and they become a destructive force in your business? And because of their ego, they start blaming everybody else. As a CEO, you start to lose sight of what's actually going on. I share this because it is extremely important for you to maintain contacts and connection as deep into your organization as often as you possibly can, so that you can formulate a real holistic understanding of what is actually going on. And I think a lot of times these C-level executives, they'll lean into trust far too much when the people on their team might be slipping. They might not be performing. They might be the destructive force in their organization. This brings us back to the conversation we were having earlier. As an outside consultant or coach coming in and getting visibility to it, the CEO might think, oh, well, this division, they're just an absolute mess. And they completely lose sight of the person who's in charge of that division because they're leaning too much into trust. So we have to feel comfortable diving as deep into the organization as possible and then listening to the feedback. You might not want to hear it and you might ignore it, but this kind of all feeds into all things related to leadership. And it's not just like ... This is how you become a leader. It's all a mesh: communication, reading others, kindness, candor, empathy, delegation, all of these different things. Leadership is more like this ever evolving mesh, and it consumes time and energy to continue to grow and be a leader. And sometimes leaning into ego is good. Sometimes you lean too far into it, but it is just a fascinating topic.
It is one of those things where you'll continue to make mistakes out there. Or at least I know I make mistakes out there. 2 questions that I would ask or suggest that you ask as a leader inside your organization. Number 1, ask yourself if you're wearing clothes. Because if everybody around you tells you your clothes are absolutely amazing and everything is really good, you might be falling into that emperor has no clothes or is not wearing clothes. Your invisible clothes are not really there, right? So you might be in that situation. So that's a reflective question. Am I wearing clothes? The other one that you can start to look into, look at the data that's available to you inside the organization. Who's showing up at meetings? Who's not showing up at meetings? Who's engaged in conversation? Who's not? If you do ENPS scores, is your ENPS score at a leadership level significantly higher than it is in functional areas in your business? If so, you might not be wearing clothes. You might not be wearing clothes. So there's a number of different ways to go through and do this, and all of this stuff is hard. I mean, it's one of the reasons that Sean and I both do the work that we do. And Sean focused on the HR and IT side of things, HR and technology side of things. Me focused on that revenue, culture, and leadership side of things. More specifically, revenue. This is hard stuff, and there's a lot of noise out in the market around what you should do or what you could do or all of these other things. And the reality is, there's always going to be something more that you can do. And the question should be, am I doing the right things in the right order to get to the objective that I'm working toward? Sean, awesome conversation. We've covered a lot of range. What did we miss?
I think the biggest realization that I've had, and interestingly enough, just from a conversation that happened a few days ago, I was sitting down with a young gentleman. He's an entrepreneur starting his web design development business. And we were in a room. There's 3 of us together in the room. And we we're talking through designing this new public speaking website for me. And at the end of the conversation, he asked, why are you doing all of this? And Mike, I'm not going to lie, I got a little choked up. I didn't expect that because it was a website design session. And I spent the vast majority of my life as the introverted IT nerd that wouldn't talk to anybody if I didn't know you. But I knew in my gut that I was meant to do more, that I was meant to have this greater impact. And as an introverted IT nerd, it makes it difficult for you to have impact at scale if you can't have a conversation with somebody. And I've spent the past 8 years forcing myself onto stages, nervous as hell. Every single time I go on, I wear my Apple Watch and my heart rate goes through the roof. Growth is uncomfortable. It's going to suck. But the last thing that we want to do is look back on our life when we're on our deathbed and think, I could have done more. Lean into the discomfort, because we only have a finite amount of time here on this planet. And don't you want to go out knowing you did everything you possibly could? And yeah, you got uncomfortable, but you accomplished everything that you were meant to accomplish. The growth is going to suck. It's going to hurt. It's going to be embarrassing and shameful. But that's what it takes to become the best version of yourself. So you got to lean into it.
So folks want to lean into it with you. Where's the best place for them to go? You can talk a little bit about the podcast and where you want people to connect up with you.
Yeah, if you just Google The Way of the Wolf podcast, you'll find our YouTube channel. You can go to our company, which is wsssolutions.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Sean Barnes. I'm putting a tremendous amount of time and energy into growing our LinkedIn presence. So LinkedIn's probably the best place to connect with me, see all the content that we put out. We put out daily content on leadership and business and just kind of helping people level up and become the best version of themselves.
Awesome. If you know somebody who would enjoy this conversation, get value out of it, please share it with them on LinkedIn and let Sean and I know. We like to see those shares. Those shares help to amplify the podcast and get the message out there to folks. Sales is a thinking process. Business is a thinking process. Life is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about your process? Thanks.